Divisions and alignments for graphic layout. It can be seemingly a very simple issue, but in some ways can be sort of complicated. It's about composition, but it's using font, text, line placement, and then of course unequal spacing, negative space, implied movement, grouping. All of those things that you explored in Unit 1, we're going to kind of put to a test here in Unit 2. So the first one's unequal spacing, and that's pretty straightforward. If you have a composition, a poster or any kind of graphic that you're going to publish, you don't want things to be perfectly symmetrical. Asymmetry is another way of describing this. And these are just simple graphics that I put together. Line placement, the next one, is used oftentimes to divide up space. So whenever you see a title for, say, an event, it's going to be placed specifically somewhere on the page in order to divide the space up, so that this unequal spacing can wind up being or containing different areas of different types of information. So in this case here, in these examples, the ones on the top employ unequal spacing using line placement. So the upper left, toy car exposition, all the information, date and location, is just slightly larger than the image of the car. And you can see here, I'll point it out with the mouse, it's just above the center line. Here it's really kind of exaggerated. On this business card, you can see that this little line, this dashed line to separate the name and the address, is just off center. Same thing here. And what I love this example. This is from Design Basics Index, How to Design Books. I love this. You can find it at Barnes & Noble. They give you this example of not really a good business card. It's split perfectly in the middle. Same thing here. Same thing here. I think this one specifically is really... let me just zoom in. I'm going to try and zoom in on that one. I think it's a great example of how that can really not work, having that line placement right dead center. There's something that's just off and somewhat awkward about this piece. So anyway, I think that's it's interesting. So look at this example. This is a student brought in this example. I love this one. The image ends just off the center. So notice how there's kind of a red background there, and the image of the cowboy with the boot, it just about goes into the other, like the top half, say. And then this line, the bottom of the rodeo, that line break ends just off the center as well. So the center would be like somewhere right in between this O and that line there. So it's just enough to be off. And I think that's what makes this an interesting image. So you don't have to separate things. One thing can't overlap the other. And this is a great example of that. The boot image overlaps, or sort of underlaps, I guess would be the right way to say it, under the text. So don't be afraid to let things kind of cross over into other quadrants. Okay, negative space and movement. These are two kind of independent things, but we'll talk about them together in these two examples. Negative space, just a brief, you guys remember this picture, you've seen it before. The space, the negative space around the vase makes two faces, or vice versa. The space in between the two faces, sort of thing. So negative space is something that doesn't have a solid object. And this example here, I love this example for two reasons. The color palette really reinforces that, like, crisp spring morning mountain bike marathon championship. But then the yellow implies sport. It's like something really pleasing about this color palette. But there's an implied movement too. So the thing that's supposed to be moving is the mountain biker, right? He's going downhill. And the reason to really look at him is he's surrounded by all of this blue sky. So there's a real interesting positive-negative relationship here. I mean, this is a silhouette, but you make him stand out in that up against that that really clear blue sky. There's a diagram that I made, just briefly outlines why I think it works. He moves toward the negative space, and he's moving at a slight downward angle, which reinforces the concept. So that's why this is a strong poster example. Great placement of objects, great use of movement, positive, negative space, and color. Okay, this image here, individuality. Don't be afraid to be different. I love this. You know, it's awesome. The one that's upside down stands out immediately. You know, it's kind of about being a kid in school and things like that. But what really is kind of genius about this one is these are used as directional devices. You know, these are like the pencil is pointing up, and it points towards this negative space. It's in the background, and then that one pencil sort of implies that it's pointing downward. The individual points toward the the individuality title. So, what a great use of placement. Also, offsetting the top of the pencils here, just off center, and using movement to direct the viewer's eye. It's an awesome example. I'm going to talk about grouping here for a minute. It's a Gestalt principle. Basically, groups of small objects can be one large object. Okay. In this case, you have 6 images along the top, slightly offset from the camping trip information here. So these two grouping of objects, so the grouping of these sort of background graphics and the font, is one big group, and then the 6 images, it's about the same size, is another group, so they kind of carry the same equal weight. This is a student example from this class. If you break it down just formally, just without any content, you know, the 6 objects in the upper left hold the same weight, same importance as the 1 object in the lower right. And when you kind of equally space all the objects, you don't tell the viewer where to look. So grouping can be a way to tell the viewer where there are certain important differences in your design. So in this case here, this is an announcement poster. There's a grouping of the general information, sort of the title, place, all of that sort of thing. The philosophy behind why this event is taking place, a little bit about the organization, and then more specific information about the event. So the grouping of, in this case, text is done really well. It's skillfully done because you know to look in different areas for different bits of information. Do I need to say anything here? Pretty awesome bad example, I think. Okay, alignment. Last one. Both positive and negative shapes and spaces can align. So here's a sample layout. This is placeholder text. Gibberish. I made some graphics here that show how things can line up. So you can have some organization and some order even though there is unequal spacing employed here. And also with this sort of typographic example. There are elements sort of all over the place, but there is some sort of alignment in order to it. So the more varied your text and your graphics are, maybe your images, in some cases you need to create some alignments to at least make that sort of scatter pattern have a little bit of sense, a little bit of organization.